Next on Astronomy Toronto, meet Graeme Ferguson, director and producer of the IMAX films Hail Columbia and The Dream is Alive.
Hello again and welcome to Astronomy Toronto. I'm your host, Randy Attwood. Last year, thousands of Torontonians packed the Ontario Place Cinesphere to take the ultimate trip, a trip into space. The IMAX films Hail Columbia and Dream is Alive made you feel like you were aboard the space shuttle with the astronauts. Today on Astronomy Toronto, we'll talk to the producer and director of these films, Graeme Ferguson. Everyone that I know has seen an IMAX film. Where does the word IMAX come from, and what is IMAX? What makes IMAX special?
The name comes from the words maximum and image. So it's maximum image, and it's transmuted into one word. If you're going to use a trademark, the best trademarks are meaningless words like IMAX and Xerox and Omnimax and words like that you can protect.
When was IMAX developed?
We were making films for Expo 67 in Montreal. A lot of my friends and I worked on those pavilions, and the pavilions were very successful. And most of them had very large pictures on the screens, very large screens, some of them multiple screens. But the main characteristic of them was that we had to use old technology. Sometimes, for instance, in the pavilion I did, Man in the Polar Regions, we had, I think, 11 projectors in the pavilion, all synchronized. In the course of that fair, some of us said to each other, wouldn't it be nicer to do this with a single big projector, a single big frame, film frame, a single big camera? And then we could work much more efficiently. And if that could be done, then these pavilions could be replicated around the world. And instead of only having them at World's Fairs, there would be big screen, high quality theaters all over the world. So that Cinesphere in Toronto really is the first attempt to do that sort of thing. And we now have nearly 50 in various parts of the world.
So I guess, Graeme, the larger the frame on the actual negative film, the larger you can project it and still get a big image.
That's exactly what happens. It's exactly like still photography, where if you have a 110 camera or a disc camera, you don't get very good quality. If you have a 35 camera, you get better. If you have a Hasselblad, which uses a big frame like this, you get even better.
I do a lot of photography myself, and I know how expensive a roll of 35mm film is. I know that 1 hour of an IMAX film contains 6 kilometers of film. That's pretty expensive if you mess up your shots, isn't it?
Well, it makes you think very carefully. You don't turn the camera on unless you're sure you have a good shot, and you turn it on as soon as you're sure you're over your shot. We used to say when we started out it was the only camera in the world where the footage counter read directly in dollars. So it was $1 a foot to run the film through. I think it's higher than that, so we can't say it anymore.
The visual aspects of IMAX, I think everyone knows, is quite beautiful, and of course that's why I use the big film. But I've always been impressed by the audio, the sound, the way it affects me. It's so fantastic how all-encompassing the sound is in an IMAX theater, because sound's coming from all around you. How is that set up?
It's about the best sound system that's ever been used in the movies. It's a 6-track system, so that you hear it coming from 6 directions around you, which because you can move the sound from speaker to speaker using the stereophonic effect. In fact, you can position the sound pretty well anywhere you want around you or up over your head. So it isn't just those 6 speaker positions that you can work with. The sound is usually recorded originally either as mono or 2-track stereo. And then in a mixing studio, it is positioned to come from the part of the theater you want it to.
When I talk to my friends about IMAX films, the first film that comes to their minds is North of Superior. You produced that in 1971. For yourself, why do you like using IMAX format? What special things can you do with it?
Essentially what we were trying to give the filmmaker, including not only me but all filmmakers, was a way to immerse the audience in the picture. So that instead of sitting back and looking at a picture like this, the picture, you were more inside the picture. You felt as if you were participating in the events. So that when we made North of Superior, it's a perfect example in a way. It opens with a flight across the lake and then up over the Sleeping Giant just off Thunder Bay. Well, see, I was in the airplane and sitting beside the pilot, and I experienced that. Well, in a normal movie, I could come back and say, well, you could never know what I experienced. In IMAX, you know exactly what I experienced because you see something, or when you go and sit at Cinesphere, you see it just as we did sitting in the airplane. The same in the forest fire. The first day in the forest fire, I was really afraid. That seemed a very big fire and very close. But after a while, I got used to it. But you can experience exactly how I felt that first day because the fire is for you in the theater just as it was for me. This very shot is from the Shuttle in Hail, Columbia. This is just the moment before the test firing. The camera there is just a few hundred feet away from the shuttle. Nobody, the closest person at that moment was 3 miles away. And so that we could now put you in the audience, or put me in the audience, in a position where no person can be for safety reasons. And that was one of the things that got NASA excited when they saw Hail Columbia. They saw, oh boy, none of us has ever actually been that close to a launch. And so when they saw it, they got enthusiastic about the idea of then taking the camera up into space and showing us where very few of the people in NASA had been. Only a few astronauts had ever gone into space, and they always came back saying, oh, I wish I could show you what it's like. And now we'd say, okay, we'll take the camera along, and that, in a way, they can take us with them.
So did you train the astronauts up here in Toronto, or did you go down to Houston to train them as they worked with the camera during their training?
We went to Houston. We took 3 of us. My wife, Phyllis Wilson, associate Dave Douglas, who's also from Toronto and has worked in IMAX films for years. And I went and lived in Houston for a year. We trained 14 astronauts initially, and each one had about 25 hours of training. And what we would do is we would take the camera there, let them work with it, let them take some pictures. Then we would take them to an IMAX or an Omnimax theater. They would look at the pictures they had taken and evaluate them. We discussed what might be done better. Then they would go back to Houston, take some more pictures, and eventually, just before the flight, we would have a final review we have an IMAX theater at Kennedy Space Center in the Visitor Center there, where lots of people go to see The Dream is Alive. And we would,
and I think it's still playing there if anyone wants to rush down and see it.
Oh yes, but in those days it was playing Hail Columbia. Mm-hmm. And the astronauts would go into that theater a day or two before their launch, and we'd have a final look at all their footage. And we'd also show them, for instance, on the second flight, we would show them what the people on the first flight, what their colleagues had taken on the first flight. And they could then, when they went into space, they'd say, all right, don't need to take that. We got a good shot of that already. What we don't have is this other thing. They would concentrate then on the other thing.
All right, well, let's take a look at a clip from The Dream is Alive, produced by IMAX in conjunction with Lockheed Corporation and the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
This is the IMAX camera in the mid-deck in Discovery on the 41B mission. This is the commander of the mission, Henry Hartsfield, Commander Hank Hartsfield, as most people call him, and he is loading the camera. And as you can see there, there's the film going around. This is the main body of the camera, and this is the magazine. On this film, on this mission, the two key people we trained to load the camera were the commander and the pilot, Hank Hartsfield and Mike Coates.
And now it's an 80-pound camera, but it doesn't matter how much things weigh in space, does it?
No, that's right. As a matter of fact, in order for him to do that, he has Velcroed the camera to the wall. You can't see the Velcro too clearly, but that's what he's done, so that it doesn't float around in the mid-deck while he's working on it.
And you talk about how you want to make sure you don't leave the camera on too long. There's not a lot of film in there, is there? I mean, how many minutes would we have to shoot?
That magazine, which has 10 pounds of film in it, will run for 3 minutes only. And they had an average of 9 magazines per flight, so that basically they could shoot around 27 minutes of film on each flight.
All right, here we have a view from actually the first mission that the IMAX camera was on, which was in April 1984. And could you describe what's happening here?
Well, this is the main thing that's happening, I think, for most people is that we're flying over Baja California, which you can easily recognize below. And what is going on in the mission is that the largest satellite ever deployed, which is called LDEF, which was just about to be deployed, is being held on the end of the Canadarm. This is the Canadarm.
And this is blown up essentially from one frame of IMAX film.
That's correct. This is one of the first pictures they ever took, probably the second shot they ever took in space. So you can see how good the training was.
Well, Dream is Alive is playing all over the world now. I see that there are Dutch, Spanish, Indonesian, Cantonese, French, Japanese versions coming out. And it's won many awards. You yourself have won awards for the IMAX process and also the movie. Could you describe some of them?
Well, there's one of these awards. This is a Genie that we received this year, not only for the Dream is Alive, but for generally for developing the IMAX system, this Academy Award is really for the same thing. It's an award to Bill Shaw and our engineering people, mainly for developing the IMAX system, the camera and the projector, which made the film possible. This Genie, or what was in those days called an Etrog, was given for North of Superior, which was the first IMAX film we made for Ontario Place.
And you've received commendations or just thanks and praise from NASA for, I think, what must be the best movie footage ever brought back from space, which must leave everyone here at IMAX House quite proud.
Oh yes, we're very pleased. Actually, probably the nicest things are not the awards, it's just the letters you get from people. Just people write in and say, I loved the film, could I have a videotape, or could I have some of the music that Mickey and Mary Beth did for it? Or, it's the ordinary people's reactions that are the nicest.
Well, can we get a videotape? Can we get some music?
No, because, well, one of the problems about the videotape is that you can actually make a videotape of it, but it doesn't really match the experience of going to an IMAX theater and seeing it. So we are, although we physically can make one, technically can make one, we prefer not to. We say it really is an experience. In going to an IMAX theater, it's an experience like going into space. A videotape can't do that. So we prefer not to release the film that way.
Well, over 300,000 people saw it last year at Ontario Place. I saw it, I feel like about 100,000, but I think I saw both films about 5 times. And it's just, you produce films which a lot of people really enjoy. And for everyone out there, thanks very much.
Thank you.
1986, however, is a sad time for talking about the space shuttle. And I know that out of the 14 people that were trained, 2 of them, or in the film, 2 of them Judy Resnick and Dick Scobie lost their lives. When that happened, like all of us, of course, it's quite sad, but does it change Dream is Alive? I think of the title, The Dream is Alive, sort of being as the tragedy happened, but the dream is still alive.
And of course, that wasn't meant by the title, because the title existed long before that. Well, what happened when it was quite not only tragic, sad, but very difficult for us, because of that. We didn't really know immediately how we would even feel about the film. The day of the January 28th, the day of the accident, I was in St. Paul for the premiere of The Dream is Alive that evening with my wife Phyllis and with Pinky Nelson, the astronaut. And Pinky had been a crew member on 41C, in which Scobie was the pilot. And we were there in the morning for the premiere, and suddenly there was this news, and we were just shattered. And NASA immediately called Pinky back to Houston, so he couldn't stay. And I was somewhat surprised that the people who run the St. Paul Theater decided to go ahead and have the premiere that evening anyway. The premiere consisted of 5 screenings. And so I was required therefore to make speeches for those 5 screenings. And so what I did is I went in and looked at the film immediately that afternoon, because I didn't know how I would feel about it. I thought, oh, what if the film makes me feel even worse and is going to make people feel even worse? And I looked at the film, and it seemed as if it still was appropriate. It really seemed to be saying the right things. The name, The Dream is Alive, seemed to suddenly take on a new meaning. And we went ahead and we did the speeches and we did the screenings. And the people came to see it. And of course, the people of the whole world were in shock that day. And the people who'd come to the premiere were as shocked, I think, as we were, who really knew the people who had died. And then what happened after the screenings was that the people who started coming up and saying, the film made me feel better. The film made me feel better about the space program. I understand more about what Judy and Scobe and those people were trying to do in space. And really that phenomenon of that evening has gone on ever since. We've had a lot of people go to the theater, theaters, because it was playing in many, many theaters by then. The attendance actually increased, I think, because people wanted to, figure out for themselves, was the exploration of space really worth the risk? And the film helps at least understand how astronauts feel about it, what it's like for them being there, and how important it is for them. And in that way, the film has, in a sense, become a gift to us from Judy and Dick and the others who made it. It says, this is what we feel about space.
Well, after Dream is Alive, the IMAX camera has flown once more on a shuttle mission, but this time the camera was outside in the payload bay during an EVA by the astronauts.
This was, of course, what we had wanted to do originally, was to build a version of the camera that could fly out and be carried around by the astronauts freely in space. That camera, we couldn't get ready in time for the 3 flights that made up The Dream is Alive. We got it finished last year, and late last year it flew on this mission. And this was the mission that was important, because this is a mission that is a precursor of what's going to go on in the building of the space station, where astronauts go out and construct large objects in space. In the case of the space station, they'll construct objects hundreds of feet in dimension. But this is a first test, and here you see the 2 crew members, and they're building an object called EASE, which itself is of no significance, except it was a test as to how you could construct and take apart an object in space, allowed them to test the speed of that. But you can see immediately that the position that we had the camera out in the bay gives us an even better feeling of what it's like to be in space and floating past the Earth than the scenes that we had in The Dream Is Alive.
So right now we're just waiting to see when the space shuttle system becomes active again. Is that pretty well all you can do?
Yes. We had our scriptwriter, Tony Myers, had written a script for this next film, as she had written for The Dream Is Alive. And we had started shooting this as the first stages in that next film. And now we'll just wait, and after the shuttle is flying again and the flights, the various experiments that we're interested in take place, for example, the deploy of Space Telescope, which is a very interesting moment in the history of the space program, and
especially for astronomers.
Yes, and it's a very interesting moment in the history of astronomy. We hope to have the camera along to film that if all goes well.
Now, you've already thought of putting it in the payload bay. Can you do anything else with the camera, like send it off away from the shuttle and look back towards the orbiter?
Yes, the camera, the configuration that we've chosen allows the camera to fly on the MMU, the Manned Maneuvering Unit, and so an astronaut can take it, fly away from the shuttle, turn around and take a picture of the shuttle. It also could fly on a free flyer, like SPAS, which is a free flyer where there is no astronaut, but it can fly away from the shuttle, or perhaps more correctly, the shuttle backs away from it, and then by remote control you can take pictures of the shuttle. And those will be very important when the space station is being built, because we'll be able to move the camera all around and see the space station actually being assembled over the, I think, 9 flights that it will take to assemble it.
Graeme, what was your interest in space sciences and astronomy before you got involved with making these films?
I don't think more than anybody else in the audience. I don't suppose there's anybody in the audience who isn't curious about space. And I guess I was just like everybody else. I thought, boy, I'd like to go. Originally, I would love to have gone myself, but as I said, it's much better to train the astronauts.
How about now? Has it changed at all?
Oh, I guess I've become a lot more interested since then. It's spending the year with the astronauts day by day gives you a bit more of their point of view. They're super people. They're super students. They're the quickest learners you could ever find. I feel about the astronauts that if you said to an astronaut, okay, on the next flight you're going to do brain surgery, and ask anybody else would say, well, I can't do that. An astronaut would say, okay, where's the book? How do I do it? What's the rule? And they would just learn. Whatever you say to an astronaut, they say, okay, I can learn to do that.
Well, as an experienced producer, director of films who's pretty well landlocked, and now you've had your first chance to send some cameras into space, what does the future hold for film producers out in orbit? Do you see any future in the near term or even in the far term? Getting away from things like E.T. and those fictional kinds of stories, but actually going out there.
I think we've got a very exciting, it's probably the most exciting story of our time, is going to be what's going to happen between 1900 and 1920, 2000 and 2020, which will be the establishing of based on the space station, the establishing of a transportation system which will take us to Mars and back, take people to Mars and back. And it will involve probably, as seen now, it will involve a permanent orbiting vehicle that will transfer people and objects from Earth orbit to Mars orbit. And that whole system, the development of the system and all the various vehicles that will be involved and the work that will be done that will eventually lead to a Mars base, Mars exploration, perhaps even a permanent Mars base. Certainly a base, at least temporarily, on an asteroid. And without any doubt, a moon base, and perhaps more important, a base at one of the points between Earth and Moon from which all of the other activities can play. That's all going to be going on in the next 35 years. And the plans for it are clearly laid out in the Payne Commission's report. And it's going to be the most exciting event of our time, I think, for anybody who's got a curiosity about the universe we live in.